A snobby bride, a desperate punch, and a florist with unshakable dignity collide at a lavish wedding. As shattered petals litter the floor, loyalties are tested and redemption takes center stage. But before we start, if you guys like this story, please comment below and subscribe to Story. Storer, please hit the bell icon. Thank you. The bouquet hit the ground with a splatter of crushed petals, vivid red against the pale marble floor of the opulent wedding venue. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and the string quartet faltered, their melody unraveling into silence. The groom's fist was still clenched, knuckles white and trembling, as the black florist staggered back, touching a hand to his bleeding lip. "Derek!" The bride, a woman with meticulously coiffed blonde hair and a designer gown shimmering under the chandeliers, shrieked in a voice sharp enough to slice through glass. "Thank you for standing up for me." Her eyes flicked disdainfully toward the florist, whose proud posture remained unbroken despite the assault. The scene was chaos embodied, whispers and murmurs spreading like wildfire, guests torn between outrage and stunned disbelief. Derek, breathing heavily, cast a glance at his bride, waiting for the approval he craved. But as he caught sight of the florist's steady gaze, something flickered in Derek's expression. Regret, perhaps, or the dawning realization of a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. 3 days before the wedding, Marissa entered the florist's sunlit shop, the air thick with the fragrant perfume of lilies and roses. Her eyes swept over the arrangements with barely concealed disdain. "Absolutely not," she declared. "I told the wedding planner I wanted a certain aesthetic. This," she gestured at the man behind the counter, "is not it." Elijah Bennett, the florist, maintained a composed demeanor. "Is there a problem with my designs, ma'am?" he asked calmly. Marissa's lips curled into a thin smile. "Your designs are fine, I suppose, but I was expecting someone more, how do I put this delicately, traditional." Derek shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Marissa, maybe we should just go with the recommendations. The flowers are great." Marissa shot him a withering look. "Derek, this is my wedding. I will not compromise." Despite the insult, Elijah nodded politely. "Best of luck with your wedding," he said evenly. As they left the shop, Derek's face burned with embarrassment. "That was unnecessary," he muttered. "I have standards," Marissa huffed. "You should be grateful I do." That evening, Derek's thoughts lingered on the encounter. Scrolling through reviews online, he saw glowing praise for Elijah's work, words like masterful and inspired. A gnawing feeling crept over him, the sense that Marissa's rigid perfectionism was overshadowing the joy their wedding should bring. Perhaps they'd made a mistake after all. The day before the wedding, disaster struck. The backup florist had failed to deliver the cascading orchids Marissa had demanded, leaving the venue woefully underwhelming. Panic etched across Derek's face as he searched for a solution. Driven by desperation and guilt, he dialed Elijah's number. "I know we didn't part on the best terms," Derek admitted, his voice strained. "But we're in a bind. Is there any chance you can help?" Elijah was silent for a moment before replying. "I'll see what I can do." Derek exhaled in relief, knowing he was risking Marissa's wrath but hoping the flowers could salvage the day. True to his word, Elijah arrived early on the wedding day, his van filled with breathtaking arrangements, vivid bursts of color that radiated elegance and transformed the venue into a floral wonderland. Guests gasped in awe as the final touches were placed. Even Marissa, though begrudgingly, had to admit the flowers were stunning. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the wedding would proceed perfectly. Elijah's presence, however, was a thorn in Marissa's pride. Resentment simmered just beneath the surface, threatening to unravel everything. Marissa's eyes narrowed as she spotted Elijah overseeing the final floral touches. "What's he doing here?" she hissed, her voice low but filled with fury. Derek's heart sank. He had hoped the flowers would be enough to placate her, but now it was clear the real issue was Elijah himself. "I called him, Marissa," Derek said, trying to calm the storm. "The arrangements look incredible. He's the best at what he does." Marissa's lips curled into a snarl. "He's not what I wanted for my wedding," she snapped. "I told you I'd handle this, but now you've embarrassed me in front of everyone." Elijah, overhearing the conversation, stepped forward and bowed his head slightly. "If my presence is a problem, I can leave," he offered with dignity. "No," Marissa shot back, her voice dripping with disdain. "Leave, now." Derek winced, but before he could say anything, Elijah turned and began to walk away, his expression calm but his pride clearly wounded. Derek stood frozen, the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had hoped to make things right with Marissa, but instead he was caught in her web of expectations and pride. He glanced at Elijah's retreating form, and something inside him twisted. The man had been nothing but professional, nothing but helpful, and yet Marissa's pride had turned him into a target. Without thinking, Derek moved toward Elijah, fury clouding his judgment. He called out, words tumbling from his mouth without filter. "You don't belong here." Elijah turned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he asked, voice even. Before Elijah could say another word, Derek's fist flew out, connecting with his lip with a sickening thud. The crowd fell silent, eyes wide in shock as Elijah staggered back, blood staining his lip. "Derek!" Marissa shrieked, her voice sharp and high, but her eyes were filled with something darker, satisfaction. She didn't stop to check if Elijah was okay. Her attention was firmly fixed on her husband. Elijah wiped his lip, his gaze calm despite the blood. "I didn't come here to fight," he said softly. "I came here to help." But the damage was done. Derek stood there, chest heaving, a mix of anger and shame flooding him as he realized the enormity of what he'd just done. The weight of the elderly woman's words hung in the air, and Derek felt a sharp pang of shame. His eyes shifted from Marissa's cold satisfaction to Elijah's unshaken dignity. The applause that followed was hesitant but genuine, a soft ripple of support for the florist in the midst of the chaos. Derek's heart sank as he realized the truth. He hadn't stood up for what was right. He had acted out of fear, fear of Marissa, fear of her perfectionism, fear of losing her approval. But now, in the face of Elijah's quiet strength, Derek understood that it wasn't worth it. He looked at Marissa, her smug face now paling under the gaze of the guests. "I'm sorry, Elijah," Derek muttered, the words tasting bitter but necessary. The florist gave a brief, respectful nod. Apology accepted. As Derek watched him leave, the weight of his choice felt heavier than any punch. Derek's heart pounded as he turned to Marissa, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Derek, what are you doing?" she hissed, furious. "I'm doing what I should have done from the start," he said firmly, standing up for what's right. Marissa's face flushed with rage, but Derek didn't look back. He approached Elijah, who stood by the door, ready to leave. "I'm sorry," Derek said, voice hoarse. "I shouldn't have let her control me." Elijah gave him a steady nod. Apology accepted. As Elijah walked out, hesitant applause rippled through the crowd, leaving Marissa to face the unraveling of her perfect wedding.